In the name of Jesus, amen. So welcome to week 2 of our As You Go series. Today deals with Detours, so thanks for that New Testament reading detour, Pastor Justin. It was incredible. Oh boy, today as we journey into the book of Acts, you started last week, we go a little bit further down the road. And today you get to Acts chapter 9 and you see yet more incredible things happening. But today, as we go into Acts chapter 9, we join Peter on the road, literally on the road. One translation says he was going from here to there, kind of going everywhere. Our reading said he was traveling. That's what Luke, the writer of the gospel reading that we heard from just a moment ago, but also this book of Acts lets us know about. He was going here and there among all of the saints, the followers of Jesus, who were scattered throughout the region around Jerusalem, and he's heading down to the Mediterranean coast. Lydda and Joppa were on the way. I'm not sure if it was summertime there, but it sure sounds like this was maybe the first recorded early church road trip. He was on his way down to Lydda and eventually to Joppa. And this story in Acts chapter 9 is complete with not just a few detours that Peter would have to take, things that he could never have expected when he put his destinations into his map application and hit the go button and took off. I doubt he could have imagined what he was about to encounter. And I suspect that on your discipleship journeys, you've also encountered just a few detours along the way. So I think maybe Peter's story here in Acts chapter 9 could help us to recalibrate as we navigate our way through the summer and beyond as we follow Jesus. You see, how you receive a detour makes all the difference. It's Michigan, and it's summer, and you know what that means, right? It's road construction season. So it's very likely that somewhere along your way this summer, you are going to hit a detour, a change in your course along your way. We're used to it as Michiganders. It seems to be part and parcel of summertime life, to encounter a detour. But here's the thing about detours. When we see them and encounter them, we almost immediately begin to filter them and process them through the lens of what the heck this is doing to our plans, our destinations, the very important places that we have to get. And why not? I mean, we're planning to get from point A to point B, and these are unexpected interruptions, aren't they? When you encounter a detour, it is an unexpected interruption. They're distractions from your original route. They force you to deviate from your expected path. I mean, you're on the way to the cottage, the campground, the grocery store, the beach, wherever you go. This was not what was supposed to be there. Detours come often unexpectedly. They are unwelcomed intruders on your journey. And they can be quite inconvenient and also painful, can't they? I mean, you know this when you've been in a detour. It used to be that you'd be slowly creeping through a construction zone when you might see that dreaded orange diamond with big black block letters that said detour, and you'd pull out your paper map and you'd start trying to navigate around it. Now you look at the screen in your car or on your phone and you just watch that estimated time of arrival going up. Your trip duration is getting longer and longer. It is painful when it starts costing you time and money and even your sanity. You know this. Detours can be inconvenient and even painful. And there's one more thing. They can also leave you with a fair bit of uncertainty. Detours touch off a million questions in our mind. Like, how long will this take? How many more miles am I going to have to go on this trip? How are my kids going to do? Because I expected this trip to be the section where they napped, and now I'm hitting the brakes and they're wide awake. Where will I end up? Do I have enough gas to get there? Detours bring out question upon question for us, and they can leave us with a fair bit of uncertainty. And, I mean, if you're honest with yourself, that's kind of how we all usually encounter detours. What we often don't do is stop to consider why the detour is there in the first place. Do you know that behind a detour is a master planner who carefully thought out that route and considered its impact, its importance, and its ability to get you from point A to point B in a way they deemed was necessary for your good and the good of others? I mean, maybe it's a traffic hazard like high water if it's been raining, or a giant pothole in the road, or a construction area that they don't want you to encounter because they know it wouldn't be good for you or their workers. Maybe it's they have a bigger plan that you could possibly have any idea about. They've got a larger goal in mind and you don't have enough information, but we rarely stop to consider a detour from that perspective. From that perspective, detours always have purpose, and they shape our journeys for your good and for the good of others. And yet that's hardly how we ever receive them, especially when you see that orange diamond sign and it messes up your traveling schedule. I think that sometimes the activity of Jesus in your everyday life can feel like one giant detour at times, can it? How you receive that detour makes all the difference. This past 8 months, we've been cultivating through our story cards the habit of looking for what Jesus is up to in our everyday lives. And some of you have turned in multiple story cards. Some of you are sitting right on the edge. You're ready to turn one in. And boy, we'd love to receive that from you. If you need help, come and talk to us. But we've been cultivating this habit as we're seeking everyone's story and sharing in his story. We're trying to lean in still to those values as we seek people's stories, as we see what Jesus is up to in our life. The St. Luke values of dependence on Jesus, openness to people and expression, faithfulness to complex truth, and connection through authentic relationships. It's what we're trying to get done here. It's what we're trying to be more aware of and open to with Jesus at the center of our lives. And we do that knowing in our heads that Jesus is right in the middle of our everyday lives and interactions, don't we? We know that in our heads. We know he's in the ordinary and the extraordinary, in the mundane and even in the confusing. But let's face it, we can know all of that and try to practice all of that. But what we're going to encounter this summer, what you've encountered over the past year or 2 years or 10 years, the changes in your plans, the detours that come along, they might still, even though you know all that, they might still feel less like something Jesus is graciously leading you through to get you to where he wants you to be for your good and for the sake of others. And it might actually feel more like an unnecessary inconvenience from your very important journey that you have planned out. That's our reality. And when all we can see is how the plan that we made to get from where we currently are to the place we need to get was changed up, then the unexpected interruption becomes a blinder. It narrows our vision and it prevents us from seeing what Jesus is up to, or sometimes even being open to considering that Jesus might be in the middle of that change of plan. And you know that firsthand. If you have ever lost a job, gotten sick, experienced rejection, felt loneliness, were caught up in a relational battle, or had to give up on your plans for any reason at all. It was an unexpected intrusion into your life, wasn't it, that led to that painful inconvenience that you're still trying to make sense of all these years later. The more you tried to correct your course, to get yourself back on the path that you knew was the right path, the one you were supposed to take, the more frustrated you became, didn't you? You tried to navigate around that detour. It's what we like to do, but you could never quite correct your course or right the ship. And you can still see the dreams that you had to let go of years ago. And the uncertainty, my goodness. Some of you are living in uncertainty all the time. Where do I stand with that person? How do I recover now? What's my next step? When will I get it all done because I just gave up that precious time that I had? How will I survive it this time? And when will I feel like myself ever again? And all along, we become what Martin Luther said, what Pastor Justin pointed us to, a little phrase a few weeks ago, incurvatus in se. We become lives curved in on themselves instead of bent outward for God and for the sake of others. And I don't know about you, but I don't get a sense that any of what I just described was part of Acts chapter 9 today when Peter was traveling. when he was going from here to there among all the saints. What I see in this lesson is a follower of Jesus who encounters a paralyzed man named Aeneas, who gets healed by Peter in the name and the power of Jesus. And I see Peter responding to a request to go to Joppa, where he raises Tabitha, or Dorcas, if that's the translation you prefer, this faithful woman who sewed for everyone. Acts 9 feels less to me sometimes, I think, like a detour with Peter, and more like what a superhuman would do. In fact, what I see Peter looking like here in Acts 9 is an awful lot like what I see from Jesus. I mean, did you catch the similarity in the gospel lesson today? The raising of Jairus' daughter and the raising of Tabitha? I think the two may actually be connected for a reason. And that leaves me wondering, if I can't identify all that much with how Acts 9 changes things for my journey, how could any of us? How could Acts chapter 9 help us at all? Well, I've got a suggestion. Let's try this. Let's consider today what Peter's story card would have been had he been filling one of these out and turning it in here at St. Luke. I mean, he would have looked at it, and at the top it would have said 1,001 stories. You know our story card. And then that question, what's Jesus been up to in your life? And that little question, like flipping from one side of a coin to another, or recalibrating your GPS in the middle of your trip, that little question, I think, begins to change everything about how you encounter detours on your discipleship journey. I can almost hear Peter saying it this way. So I was on my way to Joppa, when I heard about this man named Aeneas. I was planning to go and visit all the saints there to encourage them and to hear what Jesus had been up to among them. So you can imagine my surprise when someone took me to see this paralyzed man. In fact, when they told me he was paralyzed and they asked me to come, it took me back to that time when I was with Jesus and he was preaching. It was not long after he first called me to come and to follow. And we were in that house when all of a sudden the roof opened up and we saw 4 men lowering a paralyzed man down right in front of Jesus. And in that moment, I thought, how could they be interrupting Jesus, the Master? How would we ever get the attention back on him? How could this ever be rescued? And in that moment, Jesus did something else. When we thought we should send them away, he saw that interruption as an opportunity for kingdom grace. I missed it then, but not this time, not with Aeneas. And yet it wasn't always that easy to see it differently, to see it through Jesus' eyes. When Tabitha's friends showed up, all I wanted to do was rest there in Lydda and to hear more of Aeneas' story. But I couldn't ignore that I'd been in a situation like this before. It was that time when we were asked by a synagogue ruler named Jairus to come to his house because his little baby girl was sick. We knew Jesus would do something incredible, but we had no idea what it would involve. A delay in travel, a crowd that just about crushed all of us, and a woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years. How inconvenient to the journey we had to make to Jairus' house. How painful when we learned that that little girl had died. I should have known that even that wasn't beyond the kingdom grace that Jesus brought. You see, he raised that little girl from the dead. He brought her back to life. We disciples learned slowly, very, very slowly, that it was always better to depend on Jesus than on our own plans, because you never knew what detour you might take when you were with Jesus. There was always purpose to it. It was like he had it all planned out. And it was always for our good and for the good of others. We might have never picked the destinations, and certainly not the route to get there. But when we followed Jesus, we got to participate in the Father's kingdom activity. So when they came, Tabitha's friends, I decided to take that detour to follow along, and it led me to this incredible woman who had sewed for literally everyone in the community. And her story is so encouraging, it's still helping me on my discipleship journey today to follow Jesus better. Oh, the healing of Aeneas, the raising of Tabitha, well, that was all Jesus. He led me to both of those people when I never could have expected this. He shaped openness in me to them and to what he could do, anything at all. And you know what? Life continues to be an adventure of discovery every day, because my everyday depends on Jesus and not my plans. It's still not easy. You might even need to remind me of the promise I'm holding onto as I take my next steps. I'm with you always to the very end of the age, because you know what I have to do now? I've got to go on to meet with this Gentile guy named Cornelius, and I'm pretty sure something interesting might just happen. Imagine that Peter's story card would have gone something like that. See, how you receive a detour makes all the difference. And when you begin with the question, what's Jesus up to in your life, he reorients and recalibrates you toward greater dependence, first and foremost, on him. And now, instead of immediately seeing the impact of a detour on your important plans, the change of your journey, you now begin to consider Jesus at the center of whatever you encounter each and every day of this summer and into the future, as he leads you from point A to point B, his point A and point B, because he knows it's for your good and for the good of others, even when it seems impossible to see how being rerouted could be any good at all. In fact, if you look back at Peter's collection of story cards, if you even went back into the gospel, I think you'd find that he learned along the way from detour after detour, like that time when it was unexpected and an inconvenience for Jesus to say he was going to the cross, and Peter said, "No, I know the plan, and it's not to go there." And he got rebuked by Jesus and called Satan. Or that time when he said, "I'm going to go with you to the cross, Jesus. I'm never going to fall asleep and fall away from you." And he caught some winks in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he denied Jesus 3 times. Or that time when he was unsure of what was next after Jesus ascended, and then experienced the joy of Pentecost and the power of the Spirit. Peter learned slowly and slowly and slowly what it meant to be open to Jesus in his life. And he found out time and time again that there is absolutely no sinful misstep, no curving in on yourself that Jesus couldn't forgive in his life. And the same is true for you. There is no misstep that he couldn't and wouldn't forgive in your life either. Nothing can deter him from continuing to lead you and guide you on this journey of discipleship, on a path that is good for you and for the sake of others. Not even death on the cross could do that. It was his Father's plan for your good and for the good of the world. And you know, Jesus' dependence on God the Father opened the way of salvation and new creation for you and for me, and his dependence on his Father's plan did even more than that. It continued by the power of his death and resurrection to shape Peter as it shapes us toward more and greater openness for what Jesus is up to in the lives of other people. So was Peter perfect at seeing detours as kingdom opportunities that Jesus was at the center of? You know the answer to that. No way. He still messed up from time to time, but by the time Acts 9, our passage today, rolls around, Jesus had been shaping Peter for a long, long time. And so it is for us as we go into the summer. Invited as forgiven sinners and set-apart saints to be open to discipling detours that take you wherever Jesus wants you to go, whether they're through literal construction zones that make you groan or through those everyday changes to your plans that you know are coming. What those stories of detours will be remains to be seen, but I know what it looked like in the life of one of your St. Luke disciples, your fellow followers of Jesus. See, she shares this story. Recently, a friend texted me asking if we could take a minute to pray together sometime during the day. As I often do, I called instead of responding via text. Since she was close by, it made most sense for her to stop by my house right then. It turns out she was facing an uncomfortable conversation later that day, and she wanted to go into it with the right heart, not letting her emotion rule the circumstance. She knew that having another follower of Jesus stand with her would help. We talked briefly, then prayed, and we both went about our responsibilities of the day. I didn't need to know all the details of her circumstances to pray with her, and was reminded that often the simple, unplanned times are where Jesus does the most powerful work. Trust him with the timing. Her next step is to stay aware of the reality that interruptions are sometimes the next right things, and be willing to pause. And the promise she's hanging on to is this, that Jesus will help her have eyes to see and ears to hear when the interruptions come, that they're his breaking through into her life, giving her discernment about how to respond, and also that he'll provide a time to accomplish and complete whatever she was doing at that interruption, or at least lessen her urgency for the unimportant. It can be as big as Peter or as simple as someone who just needs a moment to talk and to pray. And you're invited this summer and beyond to be curious, just like this follower of Jesus was, about what Jesus might be up to in your life, to open your eyes, to look for his activity around you, and to respond with graciousness and love for the sake of others. It probably won't be a healing of a paralyzed man or raising a dead person back to life. I've got to tell you, it's probably not going to be that. It's probably going to look more like the simple and the ordinary. And Jesus promises he's going to be right there with you in the middle of it. Even when you had to put your plans aside, he'll show up in the confusion and the delays, the detours that tempt you to see only how your plans have been changed. And he's going to continue to invite you and me back to join him in the lives of the people around us on his mission of grace. So, have a great summer as you go. Amen.